Okay, so like I was saying, assess and manage risk is one of my favorite topics. It's a short topic, it's a short deck, but there's a lot of stuff in here that we want to talk about. Let me get that out of the way. Um, I generally, when I talk about the risk management stuff, I like to say that it's what separates the good PMs from the really great PMs. Really great PMs, project managers, assessing and managing the risk is what separates them. They being able to handle all of that is what really makes you stand out. So it's a very important topic to cover. So, and we're going to jump right in here now. So, assess and manage risk and execute the project with urgency required to deliver business value. This is the topics we're going to cover today. The second one, when we get down there, this is new stuff. Really, this is an agile type of thing. The part B there. So the first part here, enablers, determine risk management approach, how we're going to manage that, figure out how we want to do this. Iteratively identify, assess, prioritize risk and risk responses, determine the risk response, and implement risk response. We'll talk about all that stuff as we get through here. Our deliverables will have a risk management plan, just like we normally do. We'll talk about that more. Risk register, create risk response plan, implement risk response plan, and our tools are going to be OPAs, meetings, expert judgment, risk analysis techniques, update risk register, risk probability impact assessment, monitor and manage risk. We'll talk about those coming up here. So risk is an uncertain event or condition that, if occurs, has a positive or negative effect on one or more project objectives. The trigger condition is an event or situation that indicates that a risk is about to occur. That's very, very broad, but essentially, when we think about risk, we normally think about the negative. We generally don't call it a risk if it's like, ooh, I'm at a risk to make $1 million. Well, you know, that's we don't think of that as a risk. We think of that as an opportunity. We think about, oh, I might lose $1 million. That's a risk. And the primary components here, it's a measure of the probability that the risk event will occur. So I'm building a building and a meteorite could take out my building. The probability is minuscule. The impact of the risk occurring on a project, so if I'm building a building and a meteorite does in fact hit my building, it's going to wipe out everything I did since we broke ground, right? So it has a huge risk, but the probability is minuscule. And now here they're talking about positive risk, the risks that produce a positive project outcome, also referred to as opportunities. Risks have negative impact on a project, referred to as threats. So again, positive, we think of them as opportunities. I think of negative as kind of risk. So, but threats is fine. Any question so far about risk? We really haven't touched this too much yet, but anybody have any questions so far? All right, let's kind of move on. So the risk management plan, we have done cost management plans, we've done scope management plans, we've done schedule management plans, we've done all kinds of management plans that tell us how we are going to manage that particular topic. And the risk management plan is not the risk management, it's the plan, how we're going to deal with risk when it comes up and throughout the project. So we're going to get a strategy on how we're going to do that. We're going to have a methodology that we're going to do. Roles and responsibilities. So if the risk comes up for this kind of thing, who's responsible for it? What roles do they have to play? Funding. We talked when we got into cost, we talked a little bit about contingency reserve and management reserve. Generally, that's what that funding is what manages our risk. That's the funding we're talking about when we talk about risk. So if I'm worried about a rain delay on a particular step in the project, I have a contingency reserve for that rain delay that will fund the overage or whatever that happens. If I have something overall, an unknown risk that hit the project that didn't fall into any particular category, that's where my management reserve comes in and the funding to deal with that risk. We'll talk about timing. There's a lot of things that timing impacts in our risk when we're managing our risk. One is, when does the risk occur? When is our threshold where we say, hey, we're so far past where we want to be. Now it's time we got to do something, that kind of stuff. So timing is really important. We'll talk about that. The risk categories. There are different ways we'll break those down. We'll talk about those in a little bit. The stakeholders' risk appetite. Do they have a big appetite for risk? Do they have no appetite for risk? Or somewhere in between is usually where they fall. Definition of risk, probability, and impact. We kind of talked a little bit about that before, and we'll come into that more. Probability and impact matrix, which is essentially a table that puts that all on there. Reporting formats, how we're going to report risks and how we've dealt with risks or how we're dealing with them. And we'll have tracking documents. You'll have a risk breakdown structure. There's all kinds of different documents you might have for them. Any questions about the risk management plan? Again, this is not the risk documents. This is how we're going to deal with risk. This is just like cost. It's not the budget. It's how we came up with the budget, how we manage the budget. Same thing for our scope. It's not the scope. It's how we manage the scope, what we're going to do to document the scope, that kind of stuff. Same thing here. Any questions on this one so far? Pretty simple stuff. We have these for every, what used to be every knowledge area when we had the PMBOK 6 and 5 and 4. It's the same kind of thing. All those knowledge areas had their own management plan. Risk is just another one that we'll have. Okay, so risk identification. So we're going to identify the risks on a project. Then we have expert judgment. We have data gathering, brainstorming, checklist analysis, interviews, data analysis, blah, blah, blah. We got a whole bunch of these kinds of things. And there's a lot of different techniques that we can do to identify the risks that are out there. One of the things like down here towards the bottom, and this is something that I use. I don't use it as so much now, but we have called a prompt list, and I have a document right here. This is essentially, it's a checklist. We go through and we can evaluate risk, and you don't have to use every one of these. I don't use every one of these when I was using it, but I might go through and say the requirements. Are they stable? What is the effect on the system, the quality function, schedule, integration, design, testing kind of stuff? Are there internal interfaces changing? That's potentially a risk if we have to change an external interface. Completeness. Are the requirements missing or incompletely specified? Now, these kinds of things are waterfall right here. Completeness. We frequently at Agile have incomplete or incompletely specified requirements, if you will, because what do? We progressively elaborate, right? So today I'm like, okay, we're going to do this. Tomorrow I have to have more details about that, and the next day I got to have even more details about it. So completeness in waterfall is really important, and it's sort of important in Agile. If you don't have all of your requirements there, and you're missing something, then you got to go back, and you might not realize that you're missing something until it's really late in the project, and that might change a lot of stuff. So that's one of those. This is a humongous taxonomy that breaks these down. You can see all the questions that we have here. And I will send you guys actually, let me do that now. I think I saved a link for this. Yeah. Let me copy the link here. I'll throw that in the chat here. This is a very good document. You just want to go down to Appendix B in that document, and it will tell you about risks, and it has a prompt list, but it's got a lot more information in there. So this is one of those really important. This is one of the ways that I do it. I go through and I'm like, okay, is this a problem? Is this a problem? Or is there risk here? Is there risk associated with this? Tons of questions, and a lot of this comes from waterfall, and it may not be as important in Agile. A lot of it still is. SWOT analysis, we're probably all familiar with that. If you're not familiar with it, it's your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's a table. It divides everything up into 4 little quadrants, and stuff falls into one or one of the categories, and it's far on one end or the other kind of thing. Assumptions and constraint analysis. A lot of times our risk comes from assumptions. If we assume that we're not going to have rain, well, there may be a risk of rain, so a lot of those kinds of things will show up in our assumptions and our constraints. And then facilitation, there's another more risk identification. We facilitate how we do that. And we have meetings, which is essentially facilitation, risk workshop. Most projects I'm on, we don't have a risk workshop. We talk about those risks, but I don't actually schedule a workshop to go through that. But if you have a giant project, you're landing somebody on the moon or somebody on Mars, you'll probably have a ton of risk workshops to just go through everything. So you'll see that depending on the project, you may or may not have a risk workshop or in various levels of a risk workshop. Any questions on identifying these risks? I mean, these are just a list of things that we can do to help identify them. And you may use some or all of these. No questions? Okay. Let's move on. So the risk management approach. Project management knowledge area that includes the process of conducting risk management planning, identification, analysis, response planning, response implementation, monitoring risk on a project. This is kind of a weird slide for me. This really comes out of box 6, which they don't really have the knowledge areas like this in 7. So just understand that it's the project risk management. It covers a lot of ground. It's not just identifying your risk. It's not just planning for your risk. It's planning your responses and implementing your responses and monitoring for it. Where our thresholds are. Hey, you know what? We're 10% over our budget. That might be a threshold where we have to do something different. There's tons of stuff that's out there. We talked about we'll get to that in a minute. About the causes of our risk and how we categorize risk. We'll get to that, I think, coming up here really shortly. And there it is. Okay. So the risk classifications, this is effect-based risk classifications is one way to do it. This is what's the effect of the risk. Is it hitting time, cost, quality, or scope? And I talked about this before. These are the big ones. Quality, usually I kind of lump that in with scope, but it's there. They've got it separate as a separate entity there. So 99 times out of 100, they fall into one of these time, cost, and scope categories. I mean, there are other risks out there that might not be there, but generally speaking, it hits those kinds of things, and those are where we're always looking for our risks. The source-based risk classification is a little different. It's kind of sort of the opposite. It's not what's affected, it's what can affect the risk. So is it internal to the project? Is it labor is my risk? Am I worried about strikes or this, that, or the other? Those are source-based risks. They will affect time, cost, quality, scope kind of thing, but we're categorizing them by the source of the risk and not the outcome of that risk. So we'll see those different. These are 2 different ways you can do this, and in some cases you may actually have them both. And again, this is just primarily for us to stay ahead of the risk. That's the goal when we're doing risk management. We're staying ahead of it. You can't avoid risk. It's just, you can. It's very, very, very difficult, very, very expensive to avoid all risks. So generally, we look for that acceptable level of risk, and then what's not acceptable. How do we deal with that? So we'll talk about that some more coming up here. Any question about classifying the risk? There's a risk breakdown structure. You can find that in the PMBOK. I'm not sure exactly where you'll find that in there, but you can look that up, RBS, risk breakdown structure. Similar to how we do a work breakdown structure. I don't believe we talk about it in the slides here, but it's a good idea to know what that is, even if it doesn't show up on the exam. It's a good thing to know. Okay, so we have business risk types. This is, let's call it, I'm sure, not sure. Let's just read it. Business risk. It's inherent in the business. All projects have potential for loss or profit. So we were just talking about that. You almost can't avoid it. Purchasing inventory without guaranteed sales. I wouldn't call that a project type of risk. Purchasing inventory without guaranteed sales it's a risk. It's a business type of risk, but it's not integral to project type work. And I don't like the examples that they use for that. For us, the risk is not delivering the project on time. Correct. I mean, this is really on time or on budget, or in scope. We get all the scope delivered, or we have good quality. Those are the types of things that we're looking at for a risk. And this is an example of a risk, but it's not inherent to a project. Same thing for insurable risk here, only potential for loss, no potential for profit. Insurance may be purchased to offset losses, loss of inventory due to fire, same thing. This is not a real good example of the risk that we are talking about in general. You might want to know this just for the exam thing, but one of the insurable type of risks that we have, like if you get your carpet cleaned or you have somebody come and do work on your house, one of the first things you look for is that the worker is bonded, that there is an insurance out there to protect you if they screw up when they do the work. That's an insurable type of risk that we have, and there are a lot more of them out there. There's a ton of them out there, and the bigger the project is, the more insurance you take out on the risks that are there. We don't talk about that so much in the new stuff, the new material, but insuring the risk is one way we transfer the risk to somebody else. But we'll talk about that in a minute here, though. Any question on about a business risk versus and an insurable risk? Again, these are probably not the best examples, but there's plenty of other examples out there. Okay, so we have business risk, competitive, legislative, monetary, operational. So these are descriptions of those. Increased competition in the marketplace and a rival company developing a superior product. So that's one of the risks that we have out there in that, you know, that competitive environment. If we're building something, we have a risk, just the risks that go with every project that we build. If we're building something and there's somebody else out there trying to build the very same thing, we have that extra risk on top of it. We have that competitive risk that's there, that the risk that they get done first, or that they get done better, or that they get done and it's a lot cheaper product, or whatever. There's the risk that we're going to be out competed once we deliver a product. So we not only have to deliver this, but we have to deliver it faster, better, cheaper, whatever, than the other guys. Legislative risk. If you're building something right now, I mean, if you're building a coal-fired plant, well, obviously there's a big any coal-fired plant, electricity or whatever. I mean, there's new laws are going out all the time. You get fined heavier and heavier fines because of carbon footprint, things like that. So there's legislative stuff out there that might make something that you start today a lot less feasible tomorrow. So there's legislative stuff out there that you have to look at, and you may have to spend extra money to make sure that your project isn't non-compliant, I guess is the word we're looking for. There's monetary business risk. I mean, obviously, increased prices in raw materials, our labor cost, our taxes can jack up the price, and it will jeopardize your scope. So it's, or not your scope, I'm sorry, it will jeopardize your budget. So there is a risk to your budget. Again, we're talking about budget. That's one of the big ones. And then operational ones, this is where a lot of the risk comes in. Now they've got down here fraud, theft, employee injury, workplace accident, damage to equipment. Those operational in this term, I would think of like if we're developing software, the risk there that those guys aren't going to get the job done on time. The risk is they're not going to get a good job done, or they're going to have other kinds of issues, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of those things. So there's lots of types of risks that are out there that will impact your project. But generally speaking, we want to be thinking in terms of, cost, scope, time, and the quality. Any question on these business risk types? Again, this is kind of not all just project management risk. This is risks in general. Okay, so risk tolerance. We have appetite, or risk tolerance, appetite, and threshold. So the risk tolerance is sort of the appetite. Generally speaking, I use them synonymously. The risk tolerance is the maximum amount of risk and the potential impact that risk occurring in a project manager key stakeholder is willing to accept. That's their appetite for risk. Hey, I'm willing to accept this risk. I'm willing to accept that risk. I am not going to let you do this. I mean, that is just too risky. That's their appetite for risk. And that's kind of what that last sentence is saying. The degree of uncertainty an organization or individual is willing to accept in anticipation of that reward. So it's like we're I can accept a lot of risk or I won't. It just kind of depends. Well, the risk threshold is different here. This is the level of risk where we have to do something about it. So like I was saying, if you set a risk, a threshold of 20% over budget, if you're over 20% over your budget when you're working on this project, at 20%, it's going to trigger something to do something to fix that budget problem. It might just mean you got to add more money, or you might want to reevaluate what's going on. What we do is our risk response, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But the risk threshold is that line in the sand where we say, okay, we've gone too far over budget, we're too far behind schedule, we haven't delivered enough scope yet, or the quality of what we're seeing is just not acceptable. You draw that line in the sand, and once you step over that threshold that's your risk threshold, and that's when you have to do something about it. And generally speaking, that's our risk response, which we'll talk about in a minute. Does anybody have any questions about our risk tolerance, appetite, or threshold here? Kind of cranking through this stuff. Risk is really important out there, just so you know. I expect there'll be questions on the exam, and they'll probably be embedded in questions that aren't necessarily risk related. Okay, well, let's move on here then. Guidelines to iteratively identify, assess, and prioritize risk. Again, I will point this out here. This is something we do for waterfall. You'll do some of this stuff into probably all of this to a lesser degree in agile, but generally speaking, this is the waterfall type of slide here, for lack of a better term. So when we perform a structured review of appropriate documentation from other planning processes with key project stakeholders to ensure an understanding of each, okay? This is generally something we don't necessarily do in Agile. I mean, Agile is more about the code and less about the documentation. It's not that you don't do documentation, but Agile this is really not an Agile step right here. Use one or more risk identification techniques to identify risk and their possible triggers. Now, we do this every time, all the time. Whenever we're working on something, we should be looking at the risk. And as project managers, again, it's what sets us apart. If you anticipate a risk from something, you look really good when that thing happens and you have a response ready for it, so that there's no, some people, there's a risk and they just keep going because they don't even realize that was a problem and somewhere down the road. So identifying those risks and having an appropriate response, that makes you look really good as a project manager. So just a kind of a FYI. Be consistent. Whatever method you adopt, apply it systematically across your project. Before the project begins, identify risk in every project segment and work package. Again, this is not Agile. We do not do this kind of thing in Agile because guess what? We don't even know all of the stuff that's going to be happening yet and all of these work packages yet. At the onset, before the project even begins, we don't even know half of that stuff. That's identifying risk in things that you may not even have to deliver down the road is a waste of time and money, and it's not something that we would do in Agile. So something to keep in mind on the exam. This you might see this on the exam. I don't know how much of this slide will actually be there. Please keep that in mind. This is talking about waterfall type stuff and not really Agile here on this third bullet. Apply your method consistently, but be on the lookout for special circumstances that might arise in any project segment. Now, this is something that we do all the time, and I mean, this is really what risk management is all about. Those special circumstances, you know, the sunny day stuff that happens. Well, that's I don't want to call it risk free, but there's very little risk involved with that, and there's not, you know, we always have the risk that people are going to be out sick, or that weather's going to interfere with our construction, or legal is going to hold us up on something, or contractors are going to want to renegotiate, or some kind of thing is going to happen where we have, you know, there's stuff that happens every day in our everyday work. Special circumstances are really what our risk management is mostly about. The other stuff is boilerplate. I don't want to say it's exactly boilerplate, but it's a lot of it. I mean, you could go down and do the same thing, you know, first thing you do right out of the gate. Well, we have a risk that we're going to run over budget. That's a risk. I mean, that's a risk on just about everything that you do. There's a risk that we're going to get behind schedule. That's just something we always see. That's not really new. That's not a special circumstance. It's something that almost every project has that as a risk. And as you get through parts of it, you know, that risk goes down and down and down and down, unless of course you get behind schedule and you stay behind schedule, then it gets worse and worse and worse. But so special circumstances are really what risk is about. I mean, that's the crux of that's what makes us, again, separates great project managers from regular project managers. Consult relevant historical information such as risk response plans and final reports from previous similar projects that may include lessons learned, describing problems and the resolutions. These are good to have in your brain and when you're thinking about it, when you're talking about risk. Again, if you're doing Agile, it's hard to look at historical information because you may not be following history. You know, when you get your project and as you progressively elaborate through your project and iteratively deliver stuff, history, I don't want to say history changes, but our idea of how close we are to history might change. So history says this, but we're totally on a different track here. Now there might be other history we can go back and look at, but hitting that at the beginning of the project is kind of, I don't want to call it useless, but it's a good idea to have it under your thumb, but it's not something you're going to spend a lot of time kind of going back up to that third bullet where it's just, we can't really do a lot of that stuff in advance. We can look for a lot of things out there, and just Agile has its own inherent risk that, you know, because we don't plan as far in advance, things can happen. And that's just kind of an inherent risk in Agile. Once risks have been identified, group them into categories that reflect common sources of risk for your industry or application area. This when we went on that slide, let me go back a couple slides here. We talked about risk. This is source-based risk, so you can classify it this way. They're telling you here, and then that other slide, get your source down for the risk. Getting a source-based risk categorization helps you to avoid the risk because you know this is the source of risk. We can concentrate here to make sure that it doesn't happen. The effect of the risk is more when you're talking about risk response, how we want to deal with that risk once it happens. And then use the results of your analysis after you've done all the stuff on your risks. And again, this is primarily waterfall, but you might have this in Agile too. You should have it in Agile, it just won't be nearly as comprehensive as a waterfall risk analysis. You'll get all that stuff into the risk register. So your risk register will say, we got a risk here, we got a risk here, we got a risk here, we got let's call it, for lack of a better term, an opportunity here. We got an opportunity here. We got an opportunity here. And this is how we're going to exploit that opportunity. This is how we're going to respond to that risk, blah, blah, blah. So you document all those kinds of things, and then as they happen, you're like, oh, we knew this was a possibility, and it did, and here's our response. So that's what you'll be seeing, and that's the kind of stuff you'll have in your risk register. Anybody have any questions about a risk register? Kind of think about, we have a stakeholder register. We have tons of registers out there. Risk register is just one more of them. Questions? You guys are awfully quiet. Am I talking too fast here?
No, I think you're good.
Oh, okay, good. All right, well, we're cranking through this stuff here, so. All right, qualitative risk analysis. Qualitative risk analysis is a technique used to determine the probability of an occurrence and the impact of each identified risk. Determines the risk exposure of the project by multiplying the probability and the impact, provides a list of prioritized risks for further actions. So let's kind of take a step back. I mean, we have this qualitative risk analysis, so we do this and we say, okay, this risk is going to go on our risk register, blah, blah, blah. But not every risk that we have goes on a risk register, right? Like I gave an example earlier about I'm building a new building and there's a risk that a meteorite could just take the whole thing out, just totally level the building, kill half my staff, blah, blah, blah. I mean, the probability is almost non-existent. The impact is tremendous if it happens. So, you know, when you multiply them out, it's like there's almost, it's just not worth the trouble, right? And we have the flip side of that too. We have extremely high probability that somebody in labor is going to be out sick for a week. Okay. But the impact is minimal. If I got 100 people working on a building, and one of the guys is out sick for a week, you know, we can bring in contract workers to fill in the gap, or everybody else is just making up the slack or whatever, or it's just built in. I mean, sometimes risk is built into the estimates and things like that. So it's like, well, you know, we know that there's going to be people out sick, so we added a little extra time when we estimated the schedule. So again, some risk they don't show up on our register because they're either there's very little impact or because the probability is just minuscule. I mean, if it's just so small, you know, earthquake, I mean, if you're in California, maybe it's something you got to think about. But, you know, most places that's not necessarily the case. And even in California, they don't have that many earthquakes. So we want to qualitatively analyze the risk. So, and generally speaking, it's a probability times the impact, and generally we make that impact a dollar impact. But it could be it might be a time impact. I mean, again, if the risk is schedule, you can identify that. You know, it's going to hit your schedule by this many. You know, overall the probability is minor, but it's a lot of hours that it's going to cost us. So. But it's essentially you're multiplying the probability and the impact. And it provides a list of prioritized risks for further action. So, you know, hey, if we go through this whole thing, and essentially we do this for risk by risk by risk, and then there's tables and stuff. We'll talk about that coming up on another slide. But this is a qualitative risk analysis, and just for those of you out there that are semanticists, qualitative kind of makes you think not numerical, but this is numerical. I mean, you're taking probability times a numerical value, whether it's time or dollars. So while it says qualitative, it really is very quantitative, but we call this a qualitative risk, and that's just the nature of the beast. I don't know why they call it a qualitative one, but just so you guys know. All right, any questions about qualitative risk analysis? I mean, we're going to talk about it more here coming up on the next couple slides. All right, so probability and impact matrix. Here's one way we do this, and we talked about the kind of the SWOT thing. We have threats, or we have strengths, weaknesses, threats, and opportunities. This is half of that. We have threats and opportunities, and they have negative impact. Is it a high negative impact? Is it a very high negative impact? High, moderate, low, very low. Positive impact, same kind of thing. And then probability, how likely is it going to happen? And we weigh this about what we're going to do with it. So it's a grid for mapping the probability of an occurrence of each risk and its impact. So again, you'll notice this is actually referencing PMBOK 6. I don't know why they do that, but so if you have the PMBOK 6, you can go back and you can look into this. And I want to say it's in the 8, but it's whatever it is. It's in the risk management topic knowledge area. But in 7, you can look this stuff up still. Just you can look up probability matrix or probability impact matrix, and they will have it in there too. It's just I don't know why they took it out at 6 when they put these slides together. Okay, so now we have quantitative risk analysis. This technique used to assess the risk exposure of events to overall project objectives and determine the confidence levels of achieving the project objectives. Helps to identify time and cost contingencies of projects and refines and enhances prioritization and scoring of risk. So we talked about contingencies earlier, and I talked about it back when we talked about budget and how you have tasks that you do, and then on top of those tasks you have a contingency, and we have our management reserve, and we have our contingency reserve. And the contingency reserve is designed for risks that are specific to a task. So if my task is pouring concrete sidewalks, weather is when we pour the concrete, weather is a risk for us because maybe you can't pour it when the temperature is this low or when it's raining this hard or whatever. I don't know for sure what those would be, but they're related to that particular task, and those cost contingencies for those particular risks are calculated and included in your contingency reserve for that particular task within the project. And then, of course, you have the management reserve, and then we're getting to the unknown unknowns. It's kind of a risk that we don't know is a risk yet when we talk about management reserve. So primarily, the risk analysis, the quantitative risk, and any risk that we're talking about is, generally speaking, it applies to our contingency reserve, and then the management reserve is reserved for the unknown risk. We know that there's going to be risk with pouring concrete. We don't know what's going to happen exactly, but we know it's going to be weather, or it's going to be rain, cold, whatever. But we're not anticipating an earthquake, or we're not anticipating a meteorite, or we're not anticipating that the government's going to be overthrown and whatever. We're not looking at all kinds of other weird things that might happen to throw us off our game. And then we refine and enhance that prioritization and scoring of risk. And there's lots and lots of stuff. I mean, for some projects, we don't do any of this. We won't go through refining and enhancing the prioritization and scoring of the risk. The bigger the project, generally speaking, the more when there's a potential for loss of life, things like that, those kinds of, we really get into scoring the risk when we're getting there. Landing a person on Mars, I mean, there's a life at stake, and scoring these risks and prioritizing this stuff is hugely important. Pouring concrete, we're not really worried about somebody getting run over by a concrete mixer, because it just generally doesn't happen, and people should be on their toes, and mostly they are. So we don't get into that on some projects, but the more complex it is, and particularly the more impactful it is, especially to human life, things like that, those things get more. We do more and more and more work on quantitative risk analysis, and essentially at the end of the day, the quantitative risk analysis is going to tell us how much time, or how much cost do we have to add to the project potentially for these risks. So that's the quantitative part here. Anybody have any questions about that? There's the qualitative and quantitative risk analysis. They both involve numbers, but the quantitative risk is we're looking at the dollars and the time that we're impacted by by a potential risk, and how much we want to add to our budget and schedule to accommodate them. Questions? Any questions? Okay. Well, let's move on. Risk responses. They don't cover this nearly as much as we used to cover it in the older chapters or in the older books. But the risk response is essentially what we're going to do when we hit that trigger. When something happens, what are we going to do? Planning risk response consists of developing options, selecting strategies, agreeing on actions to address it, blah, blah, blah. We have responses for each individual risk. Some risk we're going to it's a big risk. We can't let it happen, or we're going to do whatever we can to keep it from happening, or we have to have a really good mitigation plan in place before we do this. The risks are addressed by priority, resources, activities can be added to the budget, the schedule, the project management plan to support it. Actually, before I go any further, let me stop. I'm going to go out of order a little bit here. I'm going to go to the next slide. For negative risks, we have these strategies, and the other slide will make more sense if we go through this first, I think. We have escalate, and escalate, this is a new one for this stuff. They added this, actually it might have been in 6, but no, it wasn't. This is a new strategy. We have escalate, avoid, transfer, mitigate, and accept on the risk. And essentially what escalate is it's a transfer. When we avoid a risk, so let's just say that I'm worried about rain affecting I'm pouring concrete, I'm worried about rain. So in order to stay on target, I'm going to put tarps up, we're going to put tents up, we're going to do everything we can so that rain won't impact us pouring this concrete. Or if it's cold, I'm going to put heaters out there, we're going to put everything out there, we're going to throw everything we have at it so there won't be a problem. That's avoiding the risk. That's probably the most costly up front. Transferring the risk is essentially we're dumping the risk on somebody else. So if I'm developing software, and there's a piece of the software that I want to do, I may have a contractor do that for me. So essentially the risk is his now. He's got to get this thing done. So I'm transferring the risk over there. Now, another way that you can transfer the risk is you can say, the risk is it's over my head. I'm not qualified to decide this, so I'm going to pass it up the chain and let somebody else do it. I'm going to escalate this up to my leadership and let them decide what they want. Well, guess what that is? That's really transfer, but it is now called escalate. So if we're transferring the risk up the chain of command, it's called escalate, but it's a really transfer, just so you guys know. And then mitigating a risk is essentially the big plan for dealing with where the response comes in. The mitigating the risk is, okay, if something happens, we need to do this. If it starts to rain, we need to get tarps down. We got to do this. We got to do this. We got to plan for the rain, or we got to plan for the weather, or we got to plan for whatever. We know something might happen, and I want to be able to deal with it when it does. And I want to be able to respond quickly, so we have a mitigation plan for if that risk becomes something. And that's what mitigating is all about. And then the last thing is acceptance. A very, very, very long time ago, we used to call it the ostrich response, which was we stick our head in the sand and we just ignore it. So a risk is going to happen. We don't care if it happens. We're just going to plow ahead anyway. We're just going to accept that that's a possible risk. Now, accepting that risk may end up boiling down to, guess what? We're going to have to mitigate it anyway. But generally speaking, accepting the risk is it's going to happen. We're not going to worry about it right now. And if it does become something, maybe we have to do something about it. So these are the stages of our risk strategies, essentially. So I'm going to go back to this other slide here. So again, when we're planning the risk, we're talking about developing options, selecting strategies. So one of those strategies that we just covered, you'll be saying, this is what we're going to do on this particular risk. This is what we're going to do on this one. This is what we're going to do on this one, and so forth. They're addressed by priority, and resources and activities can be added to the budget, schedule, project management plan to support the risk. Again, if we don't think we have the money, the time, or whatever. Maybe we're going to ignore the risk. You know, hey, it's a low probability, it's a big impact, but we're gonna step out on the ledge and hope we don't fall. And versus whatever else. So all those kinds of, depending on the strategy, will determine if we need to address that. If it's something that that's a risk that we just have to completely avoid happening, then we're gonna plow into it. We're gonna spend a lot of money to make sure that it doesn't happen to begin with. So they're all assigned that risk response. Hey, we're going to do this when this happens. We're going to do this when this happens. We're going to do this when this happens. And then who's going to be responsible? The person who's going to be responsible to implement that action should we trigger this risk. And there are various risk responses to this strategies to choose from to determine the risk. We just talked about those. And a fallback, sorry, I'm having trouble talking. A fallback plan can also be developed in case the primary strategy is not effective. And this happens all the time. And in IT world, in development, I get a solution at the beginning of the project, and invariably, I get one solution. I don't see the other candidate solutions, and I always ask for candidate solutions, and generally it's always a version of the original solution. But sometimes the solution just doesn't work, and sometimes the backup, and this happened to me way back when I first started with doing project management at AT&T. The big plan was we were going to use this database, and this database was a mess, and so we couldn't. Every test that we did, everything we did was there was bad data in there, so there was no. Every contingency they had us go into that database to get information. And the problem with that, of course, is that if there's a problem with that database, you're screwed no matter what you're doing. So having good candidate solutions, multiple candidate solutions, instead of just that first solution that comes up is really good to have. And if you're here at AT&T and you can get multiple candidate solutions, that's great. If you can't, well, and unfortunately I can't. I always ask, and I almost never get one. It's always nice to have, and most of the time we don't need it, but every now and then you do. So we want to have a fallback plan, and we want to have a fallback plan that doesn't rely on the same stuff that the original plan relied on. So these are some of the things that we're going to we talk about when we talk about risk responses. Essentially, what are we going to do? Who's responsible for it? What's the threshold that triggers this response is what we're looking at. Any question on risk response so far? Okay, so again, so we talked about those: escalate, avoid, transfer, mitigate. So transfer, one example of that again was we transfer the risk over to a contractor. Insurance, again, bonding, getting somebody bonded is another way to transfer some of the risk. Escalating, it's transferring the risk up the chain, but it's still transfer. Avoiding it, again, we're going to spend as much money as we can, or not as much money as we can, but we're going to spend a lot of money and time and effort to avoid that risk from happening in the first place and mitigate. If it happens, we're going to deal with it. And then accept is we're going to accept the risk. If it happens, it happens, and we'll just move on. All right, so the positive risk strategies. This is just for the opportunities that pop up. Again, escalate. Hey, you're gonna let somebody else figure that. Exploit the opportunity, essentially. So, for instance, not today, but just recently here, I was doing some testing, and we were trying to get this set up in our production environment, and we had some risks involved because we could impact real live customers because of the testing had to happen in a production environment. And we were trying to figure out a way to do this, and they came up with a really elaborate plan that, which was kind of more along the lines of mitigating, I guess. And they said it was unacceptable. And we actually did some other stuff, and we essentially exploited an opportunity here. We had an opportunity to reduce the impact on our testing, because what we did was that we were worried about stuff getting through our system and impacting other customers, but what we found out was it wouldn't matter if it impacted them, so we could avoid that. So we didn't have to go through this painstaking process to add accounts to production, test accounts to production, and blah, blah, blah. And we ended up saving a lot of money and time and effort because we exploited an opportunity here. So that happens. We have those kinds of things you'll see out there. And in Enhance, essentially something comes up, we can spend some extra money to make sure that we do exploit this opportunity. I mean, essentially, it's not we're chasing that opportunity, but we're not going to do what we can to guarantee that opportunity comes to fruition. Share is kind of along the lines of, I would almost call it along the lines of transfer instead of mitigate. But hey, we're going to do this. We're going to share credit with somebody else. We're going to whatever, and then accept. Hey, if it happens, it happens. If the opportunity is there, we do our stuff, but it doesn't materialize. Well, we accept it. So it's there. Any question about these? Exploit or escalate, exploit, enhance, share, and accept. These are the guys. Probably you can get yourself your own mnemonic for those. This is the positive risk strategy or the opportunity type risk strategies that we would look at. Any question about these? Again, the bulk of what we talk about is it's usually those negatives, but if you can capitalize on these, that's great. You want to do it if you can. Okay, contingency plans. We talked about contingency, a risk response strategy developed in advance before things go wrong. It's meant to be used if and when identified risk becomes reality. So we're mitigating when this happens. So this is the strategy when we're going to mitigate a problem. Allows the project manager to react quickly. We talked about that before. That's why we want to have that risk response. So we have our register out there and it says, this is the risk, this is the threshold, and if it hits this threshold, this is what we're going to do, and this is the person who's going to do it. This is what that contingency plan is all about. And again, it may include fallback for risk with high impact. So, hey, before we do this, we're going to roll back because we don't want this to hit 1 million customers. So this is what we're looking at. Any question about contingency plans? Anything at all here? Questions is pretty simple stuff, but it's important to do these types of things, and it's important to know this for the exam. Questions. Boy, everybody's quiet today. All right. Guidelines to determine, I can't read that thing. Determine and implement risk responses. Examine each identified risk to determine its cause and how it may affect project objectives. Brainstorm possible strategies for each risk. Now, again, this is the more complex the project, the more expensive the project, the more time-consuming the project, the more you're going to be doing this. Brainstorming possible strategies for each and every risk on a small project is not cost effective and it's not time effective, and probably you won't be doing it. But the more you know, the better your response when you do this. So and the more you plan it ahead of time, the easier it is to do it. It's essentially you're practicing for the risk before it actually happens. Choose the response strategy that's most likely to be effective for each identified risk. And this again, it really kind of depends on the risk itself. What's most effective may not be the most cost effective or the most time effective. Spending a lot of money because you've got a 1 millimeter gap instead of a 0.8 millimeter gap in a piece of hardware or whatever out there may not be. I mean, if it makes a big difference, yeah, you want to be very effective in managing that, and having a good strategy. But it might be that it doesn't matter. The response. Again, if the impact is great, you probably want to do a lot more of this versus stuff that's impact is not so big. If you're unable to bring a risk ratings below the organization's risk threshold, ask your supervisor or sponsor for help. So again, if you've got a risk that's out there and it's up there, but the initial in your risk management plan, you said, here's our threshold, and we can't get this any lower. I mean, this risk is here. It's something that could happen, and you guys have no tolerance for this. And essentially, it boils down to you got to ask somebody up the chain. What do we do about this? Because this thing is, we either need more money, we need more resources, or you got to go back and rethink how you want to do this. Blah blah blah. So that's kind of a given there. Essentially, it's something you can't fix. You got to go up the chain and get help, get them to tell you what you need to do. Identify backup strategies for risk with high risk factor scores. Again, hey, again, if stuff that has a big impact, you want to have a backup for it. If we have this response and this doesn't fix it, what else are we going to do? So you want to have that backup strategy. Determine the amount of contingency reserves necessary to deal with the accepted risk. We talked about that a lot. Now, I'm just kind of point that out again. Once you've figured out this particular task that you're going to do and the risk that's associated, how much money do I need to deal with that accepted risk? Determine how much of a contingency reserve you should set aside for an unknown risk. That's actually, I want to call that not really a true statement. It's not contingency reserve, it's management reserve. It's for those unknown risks. But again, you want it for risks that you don't know about. You want to have money aside to deal with them. As long as you know that for the exam, you're fine. Consult the risk management plan for the description of content and format of the risk response plan. So when you're putting together your risk response plan, you want to go back and look at your risk management plan because they told you how you should format all of that. That's pretty essentially what they're telling you here. Incorporate the risk response plan into the overall project plan so the strategies can be implemented and monitored. So that risk response plan, generally speaking, goes into the project management plan along with the risk management plan. Any questions about the guidelines to determine and implement risk responses?
You said what did you say about bullet number 6? You said it's not really contingency.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, when we remember earlier, I was saying when we have known risk and we have unknown risk, or unknown unknowns is what I call them. So when I'm pouring concrete, I know that the possibility is rain, and I know that's a risk that we're going to have. I know that right now we're in a crappy labor market and these guys are pissed and they might strike. I know that's a risk and I have to build in stuff for that. I do not have a clue that an earthquake is on its way. I do not have a clue that a hurricane is on its way unless it's a really short project and the hurricane's already on shore. Some of these things we don't know about, and we call those management reserve, not contingency reserve. So as long as you know that for these unknown unknowns, you need to have some kind of reserve for time and money, you should be good. If they call it a contingency reserve, don't spend it on the exam. It's, again, you will need to have time and money set aside for unknown risks. But those are, technically speaking, they're management reserves and not contingency reserves. But again, this is PMI slide, so I can't really change this. So it's just so you keep that in mind. Any other questions on any of these other bullets on this page? You guys good on this stuff now? Questions? All right, well, we're just flying through stuff here. Okay, so execute project to deliver business value. Okay, so just an FYI, we do this, some of this stuff already regularly, but this is really, really geared towards the agile methodology. This is part of what's at the heart of agile methodology. So we're going to set opportunities to deliver value incrementally. We're going to examine the business value throughout the project, support the team to subdivide tasks to find the minimum viable product. We'll talk about that. I've talked about that before, but we'll go into that some more. Measure ongoing progress based on the methodology. Collect and analyze data to make informed project decisions. All right. We'll go on, and I can take any questions here, but we'll talk about that more. There's no specific deliverables, no specific tools to do this. I mean, there is, but it's essentially it's you. You're the tool, and your brain is how you do a better product is essentially your deliverable. So create a culture of urgency. Okay. Ingrain a sense of urgency in the project environment and culture. This is one of those things that PMI has here. Agile says this too, but they also kind of talk about how you have to be sustainable. Like for instance, people work in a 40-hour work week. They're probably going to put in maybe 30 hours work and 4 hours and 8 hours of other stuff or whatever, 10 hours of other stuff. You got to do other things. And so sustainability is there. Urgency kind of makes you think you got to put in a 50-hour work week every week, and that's really that's really not what Agile is trying to say. So, because people burn out, stuff like that. Hey, we're delivering, our velocity's way up, but can you maintain that? That's a problem. But no, it ingrains a sense of urgency in the project environment and culture. You want to get the stuff out, and there's a need to do it. People are not willy-nilly selecting stuff to deliver and without any idea of what the impact is going to be or anything like that. Establishing and cultivating the appropriate project urgency culture is an ongoing task, which, I guess bullet 1 and 2 are saying the same thing. Project manager can lead the way by articulating the project's importance and vision. So essentially, that's what I was saying before. Generally speaking, we know that the project's important and why we're doing it. If you don't, as a project manager, it's a good thing to pass that along. Motivation, what motivates people to do what they do. Sometimes it's really important. Other times people are doing it. You ask them to do it, they do it, and why they're doing it isn't really that important. It's in general, it's better to pass it on what the project's importance is and what everybody's expecting from it. Everyone involved can commit to and be accountable for striving towards that vision. This is a very soft goal, committing to and be accountable for striving towards that vision. It's hard to put on paper, kind of thing. I guess it's hard to solidify that, but know this one as well. Bringing in the voice of the customer can express the desires and personalize the value. This is really important to Agile, and this has been important to every methodology that's out there. It's not always something, even now in Agile, they don't necessarily bring the voice of the customer in. So when we talk out there about we're going through the steps, we're doing this, we demo it to the customer, they look at it and say, yeah, this is what I wanted, I don't like this, blah, blah, blah. Customers should be engaged throughout the life of the project, telling you what they want, what they don't want, and what they're looking for. We should have done that before as well, but the fact is that even in Agile, sometimes customers don't show up. In AT&T, we created a role called the project owner, or I'm sorry, the product owner delegate. When the product owner couldn't show, you got a delegate, and guess where the delegate came from? They came from the team. So the team is telling the team what the customer wants, and they don't necessarily know what the customer wants because he can't be bothered to show. It happens, and if you're a project manager, trying to get them here is key. Bring that voice of the customer in, make sure that they are telling you what they want. Project team can promote the culture in their daily actions, responsiveness, and attentiveness. So again, you're out there daily making sure that they're aware of that we have this culture of urgency that we need. Any question on this one? I don't know how these questions will look on the exam, but expect them. I know there's a lot of Agile stuff on there. Examination of business value. The net quantifiable benefit derived from the business endeavor. The benefit may be tangible, intangible, or both. So essentially, we're looking at the business value. What's the value? or exactly what is of value requires examination, evaluation, and termination. So we're trying to figure out what the value is. Throughout the project, a variety of means for determining what is of value can be used. And there's all kinds of things that you can look at. The easy ones are financial. Hey, doing this, we can bring in 10,000 more customers an hour. Blah blah blah. We can make a lot more money just because we can do more volume, because financially this is a good thing to do. Financial is great. Improvements that we're talking about out here is sometimes less easy to show there's value there. Yeah, you can do this instead of doing it this way, but is that improvement really of value? We do things like this all the time, where we spend a lot of time on bells and whistles that don't really pan out. I mean, they work, but they don't really make things work better or bring in more money or new customers or whatever. And then new customers, of course, is generally speaking, it's financial. More new customers means more money. New customers, new money. Being first to market, again, generally first to market is financial. We get there first. People come to us instead, and they spend their money with us. Social is one of those, I'm going to call it intangibles, but we're socially responsible. Hey, we're going green, we're doing this, we're doing that, and all other stuff. That's a social thing, and that it's intangible, but at the end of the day, it's good to be green, but it's better to be recognized as being green, and people spend their money with us because we're green. And again, we're talking financial, and then technological. Technologically, the business value is. I'm not a big fan of that one, but you can put that one down there. I mean, if they ask you about it, I'm sure that it'll work there. Sometimes the technology is overkill, and it's not really a value. So it's something you got to look at. Technologically speaking, if you can leverage that technology for financial gain, improvements, bring in new customers, get to the market first, technologically, that's great. That's value, but the value is in the other bullets, and primarily a lot of it boils down to that first bullet, except for maybe the second to last, social is a kind of a different thing. But even that, for most businesses, that social thing is really all about a financial advantage. It may not see it right away, but we're hoping that it gets us there. Product roadmap serves as a high level, serves as a high level visual summary of products and products. Here, tell you what, we don't have that many more slides up, guys. Do you want to just crank through this, or you want to take your break now? I was just going to get through this thing here, but we got that's it for the slides. Just, I don't know, about 6-8 more slides. I don't know if you want to crank through, or do you want to take your break right now, get some water, hit the bathroom, whatever. Everybody,
drive on through.
Anybody else have any problem with that?
Keep on going.
Okay, I'm going to just keep going then. We'll just crank through this thing here. So the product roadmap serves as a high-level visual summary of the product or products of the project. Roadmap can vary in appearance and presentation. For those of you who have seen roadmaps, there's a ton of them out there. There's the S diagrams. There's, just timelines. There's all kinds of different roadmaps. They might just be in a spreadsheet or whatever. Then essentially the roadmap is we're going to go from here to here, and these are the steps to get there. The objective of the display is the strategy and the direction of the product being built and the value to be delivered. So essentially, we get here, and it's going to tell us what's the great thing about getting there. It starts with the overarching vision of the product. So here's what we want to build. Essentially, this is the end. This is the goal. Over time, the roadmap is progressively elaborated as more information is known, work is being completed or not completed, and vision is refined. So we start out, we have this goal, we start out back here at the starting line, and we start moving forward, and the clients are like, oh, well, this is great, this is not great, blah, blah, blah. And things change and as we go along, and that goal at the end starts to look a little differently, and we progressively elaborate as we get more and more information as we go along. So that is the agile way of doing things. That is not the waterfall way of doing things. Themes, which equate to goals, emerge to provide structure and association. So you'll see themes in the roadmap. Product roadmaps provide short-term and long-term visualization of the product. So we have a roadmap and we have milestones along the way. Here's the 6 month. Here's the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter. Here's the 1 year. Here's the maybe it's a 5-year goal. That end of the roadmap is 5 years off, or 10 years off, or whatever. Hey, our product is building a colony on Mars. It's 20 years away or 10 years away or whatever. So that's a roadmap. I think everybody's familiar with the concept of a roadmap. Anybody have any questions about roadmaps? Okay. Incremental delivery. We talk about this a lot. I talked about this a lot. This is an agile thing. And then when we say agile, I mean Kanban or XP or Scrum, all those kinds of things. We do incremental deliveries, provide the means to deliver value sooner rather than later. We'll talk about this a little bit more with the minimum viable product. Early and regular incremental releases lead to higher customer value and increased market share. So we put something out that's usable, then we refine it, but getting it out there right away, we get value from it right away. We don't have to wait till it's all done before we start seeing value. Enables the customer to receive parts or elements of the product prior to the full production delivery, which I was just saying. Allows users in the business to consume the targeted value and provide feedback to the project team. So, hey, I get the initial thing that we're trying to do here, and we get feedback to modify this to improve the product. The feedback enables adjustments to the direction, priority, quality of the product, which kind of that other bullet saying. Conversation with stakeholders is required to finding suitable increments. So when we're going to do this, we're going to deliver this product in increments. We need to find out what increment is of value, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The stakeholder receives a usable product with the expectation that additional features and revisions will come. So we give them something that they can use. It's not perfect. It's not exactly what we want. It's not the end product, but it's a usable. It has usable features that they can take advantage of. That's incremental delivery. Any questions on this? Which takes us to the minimal viable product. So a minimum viable product. This is the smallest collection of features that can be included in a product for customers to consider it functional. In lean methodologies, it can be referred to bare bones or no real functionality. So essentially, when we're talking back here, the stakeholders are required in finding suitable increments. That's MVP is essentially that first increment. We got to have something that they can use. I mean, if the customer can put all their information in the system, but then they can't actually order anything, well, that might not make that a minimal value. You might need that feature where they can actually order stuff. You got to talk with the business to find out what it is that they consider that minimal viable product. And MVP allows all stakeholders to see and experience some form of the project outcomes. A tangible output channel targets conversations which generate feedback and ideas. So you get it out there, people are looking at it, they're talking about it, they're saying, I hate this, I love this, this is great, but can you do this, blah, blah, blah. And MVP provides inspiration to the team and ignites shorter term urgency and a sense of accomplishment. So that sense of accomplishment, hey, we got this out there right away. It's just a 3-year project, but in 2 weeks we delivered a big chunk of it, or we delivered a chunk of this. So you get that, and then it's a short-term urgency. It's like what we do in project management, the whole WBS thing. We break things down into smaller chunks so that it's manageable. This is kind of for the team themselves. Hey, it's short term. It's stuff that's manageable for the team. Minimum viable product is a huge agile concept. Getting something usable in the hands of the clients right out of the gate as soon as you can is important. You get to start getting value right away. If you have what you think is a minimal viable product and then it's like, well, we're not ready to release it yet because it doesn't have this and it doesn't have this, and at the end of the day, you're 90% of the way through before you deliver this, then they didn't really get that benefit up front. So this is what minimum viable product is all about: getting functionality right away and then getting more functionality incrementally along the way to make the product better and better and better, and see, better returns on what you're doing. Any questions here on minimum viable product? This is a huge concept. It will definitely be on the exam. I have no doubt that you won't see this. I have no doubt you will see this on the exam. It will be there. Any questions about it? Okay, well, we're just quiet today. Minimum business increment. Now, this is a variance on the MVP, and I don't know who made this up, but it's the smallest amount of value that can be added to a product or service that benefits the business. So we have the MVP, but then somebody's like, well, we do this. It's a big change for the client, so we're gonna do it in smaller things. And again, I'm not necessarily sure I understand what the benefit of this thing is. This is the first time I saw this concept. It's confusing to me at best. It works best when the products and functions are understood. Incremental increase of value can be pinpointed. Delivery of some of that value benefits the business. Essentially, we're not delivering a minimal viable product. We're delivering pieces of it. But when it says the product and functions are understood, you're delivering some stuff, but people know what they're getting. So that it's like, let's say the first thing we're going to do is allow them to enter their account information. But then guess what? You got to do this to actually order something. You got to go somewhere else. If you understand how it all works, that's great, but you're not getting exactly everything that you want, or something that's even a minimal viable product at that point. I don't know when an MVP might be disruptive to the users in business, but I don't really know where to go on that. So it enables the project team to deliver bits of value sooner, but I guess I would question whether it's actually valuable, but that's what they're having here, so probably think of it that way. Helps teams validate whether or not improvement has been captured, enables teams to incrementally build on that success or pivot as needed. So essentially, this is smaller increments than the MVP increment. Once you've got that MVP out there, everything really is kind of an MBI after that, but you guys can take what you want from this one. I have no idea how much MBI will be on there, but just know that it's the smallest amount of value that can be added to a product or service that benefits the business. Questions on this? I'm not sure I can answer your questions on this, but if you got some, I'm willing to give it a go. Questions?
I had a question about this, and probably comes from the same sort of, or for me, it's a lack of understanding on the concept when it's not an software development type of project. Obviously, send out the first thing that you can use, and they will build on that, and we will only build and release whatever the user needs. So we will not imagine anything
sort of like that.
I
mean, essentially, what we think about it more like, okay, let's look at it like a house. Okay, I'm going to build a house, and I'm going to build a house for somebody, and they want to get out of their apartment right away. They're in an apartment, and they want to get out of their house. Well, what's the minimum amount of house that you can build for them? I mean, essentially, they want 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. They need walls. They need siding. They need a roof. They need windows. They need doors. They need plumbing. They need electricity. They need heating and cooling. They don't need to have everything painted. They don't have to have carpet. They don't even have to have all the walls up yet. They need a bathroom, and they need a bedroom and a kitchen maybe. So you could build all that and call that an MVP. Okay, that's a minimal viable product.
Okay.
And then you'll come in and you'll put up the rest of the drywall and you'll finish this room and then you'll finish that room. And you'll gradually give them more value to their house as you go along, thinking it that way as opposed to like a software type of thing. So, and then at some point in time, maybe they're like, okay, well, this is great. And you don't need to finish the basement. I don't care because I got all the room I need. I got everything I need here. So let's not finish the basement. So
I see.
that would be the kind of what we're thinking about. And we put that in software terms. That's kind of along that line. Now, normally people don't build houses that way unless you're building your own house, and because obviously you don't want to be in a house while people are doing construction around you, kind of thing. But that's kind of the concept that we're looking at now. The MBI thing, again, I'm not sure how that. I mean, it's
the
right
next
here.
step.
If you look at
Well, the
generally,
next small thing, yeah.
yeah, but it's like the smallest amount of value can be added to a product. I mean, the smallest collection of features that can be included in a product for a customer to consider it functional. I mean, for me, that's almost saying the same thing. And why they're saying this is, I mean, I think of these as the next increments as opposed to this, but I don't really know that almost doesn't make it. This doesn't describe that, which is why I hesitate to use that use it as that term. Again, I apologize if I'm not explaining this well because I really it's not something I encounter in real life out here. So
I see.
I don't know if anybody else has any questions. Maybe hopefully that helps you guys understand this a little better. On the exam, I don't think you have to have a great grasp of the concept of minimum business increment. I think of it as adding value to something that's already there, but here they kind of talk about it like it could be stuff that isn't there yet. So anyway, so when it's MBI is more viable when MVP might be disruptive. So they're almost making it sound like you use this as opposed to the MVP, which again, which of those functions that's not in the minimal viable product, or which of those features in the minimal viable product can you take away that would be useful that you could call it an MBI? So that's where I'm kind of at. Like in the house instance, well, if I don't have the plumbing in, is it really a minimal viable product? Hey, we can deliver all this without the plumbing, so we can call it an MBI, but then is it really usable? Is it a usable product? So for me, that's confusing part, but I don't think you'll need to. You're not going to drill that deep into it, I don't think, on the exam. But just know that it's the smallest amount of value can be added to a product or service. If they give you this question kind of like that, and they got MBI and MVP as a potential answer, you might be kind of screwed on that. I don't think you'll see a question like that on the exam. Generally, they're usually pretty straightforward questions. Okay. Any other questions on this? Okay, I'm glad to be away from that one. Cycles and time boxes. Project teams can set up release cycles and work time blocks. Time boxes are typically in the form of weeks or days for urgency's sake. In Agile and in Scrum, generally our time box is an iteration, and it's about 2 weeks. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but generally 2 weeks is a normal time box. Things are time boxed when we do this. Time boxing allows for better telemetry over time. Cycling the project through similar time boxes provides progress measurements from one time box to the next. So we have an iteration, and then we have another iteration, and we have another iteration, we have another iteration, and so forth. And we cycle through each one of those time boxes, each iteration, until we get to a part where we can say, this is releasable. So we have our release cycle. So maybe we have 5 iterations in a release cycle, and so forth. With time and repeated cycles, the team gains more predictable measurements that can communicate expectations of cycle times, throughput, and velocity, which kind of, when we get back to the concept of Scrum and Agile, you get a new team, you guys sit down together, you do all of the ceremonies. We talked about that. I gave you guys some links to some ceremony definitions and stuff. You sit down, you figure out what you guys can do in an iteration, and then you do your first iteration. and of course it doesn't match what you thought. You get your velocity is off or whatever. You're doing less velocity than you thought or more velocity than you thought. You didn't deliver this or you didn't do this. And every iteration you do kind of a, what's the word? I'm trying to think of the ceremony, but you have a ceremony, you go through and everybody's retrospective, and you say, well, we could have done this better, we could have done this worse, we really underestimated what we were going to be able to do here, blah, blah, blah. And as you work together, you get more and more predictable on your velocity and your throughput and your cycle times and so forth. So essentially that's what they're saying here. Over time, the team gets better at estimating what they can do. And on top of everything else, they get better at delivering the right stuff that you need to deliver. You hone in on the MVPs faster the more you work together. You can start, it's like, well, you know what, we can do these things first, but it's not going to be, it doesn't help us get our MVP done faster. So as you spend time, you get through that. Any questions on this? Time boxes and cycles. Guidelines to measure ongoing progress, divine value from the customer's business or user's perspective. So essentially, we're measuring our progress by what we give them. If the customer says you didn't give me jack, even though you gave them lots and lots of code, then you didn't progress at all. If they say this is great and I need everything I got, that's the progress you're measuring. Determine value expectations. So at the end of the day, generally the MVP kind of thing, hey, this what you're expecting. We want to know what you're expecting, and the more you work with customers, the better you get at valuing their expectations. Set targets and baselines based on expectations. This is what they're expecting. Sometimes your expectations are totally off. So you have to have them adjust your targets or the baselines and so forth. Determine metrics that communicate progress towards those valued expectations. Story points are horrible for this. I tell people this all the time. Story points are designed for within the team. Story points should not be a metric. That's why we go kind of based on those features. That's usually one of those things that the customers value. We delivered these features, we delivered this features, we delivered these features, we delivered 20 features, blah, blah, blah. But you need to determine what metrics communicate that progress well. Story points are god-awful ways to do that. Select one or more means of collecting metric data that is not too cumbersome or time-consuming for the project team. And that's the problem with features, is that it's hard to collect metric data on that. Well, this feature is allows them to do all this other stuff. This feature is really tiny feature. How do you reconcile those? Hey, we delivered this. This one feature is there's a lot of stuff for you, and this one feature is not really a lot of stuff, and where you do that. So that takes time to figure those kinds of things out. Collect data at regular interval. Again, you don't want to measure. Hey, yeah, this week we delivered 5 features, but last month we delivered 100. Well, those are not regular intervals, and it's hard to compare them when they're not regular intervals. Present the data of the progress. Again, something that is some kind of metric that is tangible to what the customer wants, not necessarily the effort that you put in. Compare the progress with the baselines and expectations. We do that all the time in any project. Hey, here we are. That's what earned value management's all about. This is our cost baseline. This is our scope baseline. This is what we expect to be done on this schedule. This is what I expect to be done with this amount of money. Improve on success or correct errors when progress is not meeting expectations, and that's what you do in those retrospectives after each one of those iterations. Any questions on this? Okay, so that's kind of it, guys. So we're assessed and manage those risks, and we execute the project with urgency required to deliver business value. The rest of this will be in other slide decks here, so I'm going to skip over that. Anybody have any questions on the material? Real quickly here, anything that we talked about today or anything else? Any questions? All right, well, here's the deal. Again, I will let you guys go. I'm here for the next 27 minutes. If you have any questions, feel free. Oh, you want to see the learning goals slide again? Hang on a second here. Sorry, I went through that too fast for you. There it is. We only covered the first two today, so that was from Layla. So anyway, if you guys want to go ahead and drop, you can. If you've got questions about this material or other material or about anything else, let me know. But let's wait for people to get finished beeping off here. That didn't sound right, did it? Beeping off. That sounds wrong somehow. Okay. I knew it was going to happen as soon as I said that. Okay, so questions. Anybody have questions? Gabriella, how about you? Do you have any questions? Gabriella, any questions? You know, I didn't pick your name randomly, by the way, Gabriella. My wife and I are taking Spanish, and there's a Professor Carvajal. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And I saw your name, so I just had to ask you if you had any questions. And you're just going to stay on mute, I guess. That's okay. Anybody else have questions? Take yourself off mute. Ask me a question. If you guys don't have any questions, I can let you all go right now. I mean, I'm letting you all go now anyway, but. So how do you guys feel about risk and risk management? Feel like it's, you guys are in tune with the concept? Risk management, anybody out there?
Somewhat.
Anybody? I'm sorry, there was a voice.
I just said somewhat.
Oh, okay. Again, I will tell you that risk management is, I mean, obviously cost and scope and schedule are really, really, really important. Risk management is, after those, it's the most important thing you can do out there. And it's what makes you stand out as a project manager, being able to deal with risk. I mean, I don't want to say anybody can make a schedule or budget. Lots of people can make schedules or budgets, and most project managers can do that. Being able to see where the risks are and being able to deal with those risks and understand those risks and communicate those risks up the chain and being able to respond to them when those risks become issues. Those kinds of things, those make you look, I mean, not to blow my own horn, but I was talking about another project where we were having some issues with the customers, and we knew this was a risk, and when it came up, we were on it instantly, and I got a half a dozen attaboys from directors like, this is great, because we were wondering whether we could even do this, and not only were we able to do it, but we were able to do it faster than we thought because we found better ways of doing it. And that's all about taking the opportunity, seeing an opportunity, and it wasn't me. None of it was my idea. I just brainstormed with these other guys and said, hey, how else can we do this? Because you're telling us that it's unacceptable, the impact on our clients. And so we sat down and we walked through this, and people said, well, what about this? And what about that? And, we had to do some other testing because the concern was that, there was actually brought up one thing that we didn't even think about, one of the risks that we weren't prepared for. And it actually, the risk never got realized, but it was a risk. We discovered a risk and we tested for it right away. It was like, well, is this going to happen? And it was like, nope. It works fine, so we don't have to worry about this. So it generated risk. We saw it. We communicated that up the chain. I got all the pats on the back, and I had to make sure that they understood that it wasn't me. But but the reality is it wouldn't happen unless me as the project manager was asking these people these questions and hammering on them and using that their expertise or subject matter knowledge to make these things happen. And that's what we have to do. And when you have a good plan to deal with risk, that just makes you look great. So that's why I emphasize this in general. It probably doesn't have, it's probably not overrepresented on the exam. So as far as the exam goes, you know risk as well as you know scope and cost and schedule, you're probably fine. But in general, it's just really important.
Okay.
So that's why I point it out to people. Any other questions on this material? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry,
I have a quick comment. This is Tom Mongovin. It says Thomas, but that's who I am. I'm actually one of the mentors, and I just want to say you did a great job. This is, in fact, in practice, probably one of the best places that a project manager adds value to the team. So I think that learning this, don't learn it for the test, learn it because it'll make you a better project manager. That's it.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to say. I mean, you do want to learn it for the exam, of course. And again, it's a place where we can make a huge impact. I mean, we make a huge impact anyway. Like I said, doing the schedule, doing the cost, the budget, all those things are impactful. But again, it's like, man, we're expected to do those other things. I mean, I guess they expect us to do risk, but they don't expect us. They don't expect. There's a lot of stuff we can do that's unexpected to them. So it's good. This is an excellent place to just stand out where other people won't necessarily do that. I mean, I don't know how many times I've come into projects where it's like, well, yeah, we just didn't expect this to happen, and it's like, well, why didn't you expect this to happen? I mean, this happens every time you make one of these things or you do one of these kinds of projects. You have these problems. Why is it unexpected? And that's the whole thing, man. If you can come in here and it's like, well, it's not only was it expected, but it was expected and we were prepared for it and we planned and we, and when you could turn one of those things into an opportunity, which, this particular time, it doesn't happen often, I will say. And it's just the fact that it happened just recently for me is just great. But when we could turn one of these risks into an opportunity, a threat to an opportunity, man, that's great. And it's even better because it's one of the things that we do. We call it FFA testing, first field something or other. I forget what the A stands for, but we have these FFA testing that has to happen in production, and it's fraught with problems because it's in production. You can impact the clients, and now we have figured out a way to do this, and they can use this moving forward on lots of other stuff. So it's not just something that we can leverage now, but we pass this knowledge on to folks and they can use it on other projects, which is, that knowledge transfer is great. And if other people can take advantage of it, I mean, it just makes us look so much better. So just kind of keep that in mind out there. But for the exam, know all the stuff we talked about, and in real life, and this will help you shine. Maybe even more than having a PMP certification behind your name. Other questions? Anybody have any other questions about the material that we talked about tonight, or other material that we talked about in classes past? Doesn't even have to be one of the ones that I taught you guys. Questions. Everybody's cranking right along. You guys got your applications fired up and ready to go when you're ready?
I don't.
I was gonna say, it was awfully quiet there. I recommend that you guys do that right away, because I heard that I don't, and I bet money that it weighs heavily on you right now that you don't have that application ready yet.
It does.
I remember I got mine done pretty quickly because I was like, oh my God, last thing I wanted was to go through all of this stuff and find out I didn't have time. I mean, I knew I had plenty of time and all that stuff. I knew I was going to meet all the criteria, but it was just, it's frustrating. And I procrastinated a little bit, but it was too hard on me to procrastinate on it. Just you lose sleep over it, and so I just got it done. So just a FYI, if you're losing sleep over it, I recommend that you get that thing done too. But other questions, guys? We got 17 more minutes here, but I don't want to hold you if nobody's got questions. Questions, comments.
I have one
concerns?
question.
Okay.
I've been going back and forth between the PMBOK and the study guide. I have not yet come across the MVP acronym. Is that in the PMBOK?
Which you're using this PMBOK 7?
I have the 6.
Oh, well, it's not going to be in
I have
6.
them both.
It should be in 7. I would have to double check that. MVP, if at the very least, it's in the Agile guide. MVP is central to Agile. The whole concept behind Agile is to get a usable product in the hands of the clients as fast as you can. Now, you're not going to give them every feature that they want in that usable product out of the gate, but that's what minimal viable product is. You're going to give them that house with a bathroom and a kitchen and plumbing and electrical and heating and cooling and a roof over their head and then locks on the doors and windows in those holes, but everything else is not going to be there. That's the whole minimal viable product, and that's an Agile thing. Delivering something that they get value out of. I can get out of my apartment, I can move in here, I can live, I don't have to pay all these other things, but I got something right out of the gate. So that's the concept behind it, in a nutshell, and it's central to Agile. I mean, time box stuff is central to Agile, but I mean, I would say minimal viable product is one of the big keys.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Questions. Just, and speaking of that, we were talking about that PMBOK there, and I was asking what version she had. I know that somebody was talking to Brian. I don't know if he's on the call here today or not. Somebody was asking about, because things don't match up. And I was talking about that actually the last class I spoke to, because the last class I taught, that PMBOK 7 does not dive with the material that we had out here. You have to look at it as a totally different source of information, but you should know what's in the PMBOK 7. So when
I do have it, so I'm actually like bouncing between the books.
Here's what I recommend is the guide that comes with that does jive with the slides. You can have the student guide out there. What you need to do with this is read that stuff really well, and we'll talk about it in the class, and we'll go over the stuff. You guys, what you should be doing though is reading that PMBOK 7, eventually cover to cover. And PMBOK 7 is a lot smaller. It's not the dictionary that PMBOK 6 was. It's a much smaller book. I recommend that you guys read that cover to cover, and get a really good understanding of all the stuff that's in there. It's got a lot of the same stuff that was in 6. It's just organized it totally differently. So they pivoted it, and it's different, organized differently, but a lot of the information is the same. But then of course they added some new stuff, Agile type of stuff. But think of it as a totally different source of material that you need to read. Don't think of it as it's going to line up, because in years past, in sessions past, and the person that was asking about it, he actually took one of the other classes. When we actually created slides ourselves for those other classes, and we lined them up with the PMBOK. PMBOK 6 and 4, 5, and then 6, but we lined them up that way. This is totally, like I said, the PMBOK 7 is PMI's book. The slides are PMI slides, and the student handbook is PMI's student handbook. And when we teach this class, those are the materials that we have to present, and those are the materials we have to use. So when we do this, we have to use their material. So we can't make slides to line up with PMBOK 7, because we have to use the ones they gave us. But using that information knowing what's in the PMBOK 7 is I believe you should know that as well. That and the handbook and the slides, and you guys should be fine. But again, probably the best preparation for this exam is to take your exams, the practice exams,
Right.
lots and lots of them. So, other questions about anything else here that we talked about? Anything? Tell you what, I'm going to stop recording.